Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
To an emergency episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado. I'm a little bit rattled right now because we had no preparation for this episode whatsoever. We don't even have a rundown. But we've got big news as Oregon State just cracked the AP Top 25 for the first time since 2013. Angie, this is about a decade in the making, Oregon State getting into the rankings. We'll talk about how much it means. It probably doesn't mean a whole lot to the team, but as far as building the program goes, obviously this is a big step. And then at the end of the pod, we'll touch a little bit on Men's Basketball Media Day, which occurred earlier in the week, and look ahead a little bit to Friday's game between Oregon State and Washington. But we are going to spend most of this shorter episode of the podcast talking about the rankings. So is this kind of like a where were you when type moment for you right now when you saw the 24 next to Oregon State's name?
I don't think it's that big, but I think it's fun for fans, and I think it's like you said, it's a big step for the program in that it is making progress. Top 20. I mean, I think they probably should have been in a little earlier than this, but and this is kind of by default since Oregon State didn't play this week. It's kind of fitting that Oregon State would get in on a bye week. But coaches poll was interesting too, because Oregon State was basically 26th in the coaches poll, receiving 71 votes, and Kentucky stayed in the coaches poll, whereas on the AP, Kentucky had dropped out. So I think Oregon State and Kentucky kind of flipped there. But no, it's a good day for Oregon State, and it's nice to see them back in that listing.
It does feel a little anticlimactic to your point there that Oregon State doesn't even play a game on Saturday, and enough chaos ensues in kind of the middle to bottom tier of the top 25 for some teams to fall out. Oregon State was right there in the waiting. They were the second team out of the rankings, I believe, last week. And so they jump in and take advantage of a few teams losing. But as you said, Oregon State probably deserved to be in the top 25 earlier on. I don't necessarily know that, a lot of the voters for this poll are East Coast writers, are Southern writers, and are not watching Oregon State football games when they kick off at 10:30 p.m. or later in their time zone. So they're probably not watching Oregon State. A lot of these ballots come in after the writers have fulfilled their duties of watching their game and writing their game, and they don't necessarily even watch all of the other games in college football or know what is going on. And that's why you can see some ballots look really lopsided and see some questionable teams and questionable rankings. The beauty of it is that you can actually go and see who voted for who. And as soon as we get done with this, I'm going to dive into the individual ballots and look at who had Oregon State where. But yeah, it's interesting that, it takes a bye week for the Beavers to get in when they had just won their sixth game in convincing fashion in a 42-9 win over Colorado last week, and that wasn't enough. But they need a little bit of help from the teams ahead of them.
Yeah, and that's where I think, and we'll probably dive into this a little bit more too, but I think the big step needs to come this next week, because it feels a little bit like now Oregon State's in, but they have a huge game this week, and I don't want to see Oregon State take that step backwards. So they have to come out and take care of business up in Seattle.
Yeah, this is the first time that Oregon State has been ranked in the AP poll since the preseason rankings back in 2013. Of course, Oregon State started that season with a game that nobody wants to remember against, in hindsight, a pretty good Eastern Washington team that ended up having a Super Bowl MVP on its sideline. Fell out of the rankings pretty quickly, but then the Beavers rattled off 6 straight wins to get to bowl eligibility. Finished the season on a bit of a slide there, but they did crack the BCS rankings after week 8. So going into week 9, Oregon State was ranked 25th. they beat up on California. I believe it was 49-17 for their 6th win of 2013. And that was enough to get into the BCS rankings as the 25th team, but the Beavers were never ranked in the AP poll or coaches poll after the preseason. So you have to go back to, 2012, I think,
2012.
when the Beavers were like a top 10 team for a couple of weeks there to find something where Oregon State was not the last team in the rankings. Obviously, this week there's UCF below them, so they're not the last team in, which is pretty impressive accomplishment for obviously a team that was building from the ground up over the last couple of years. There have been some milestones along the way. Angie getting to bowl eligibility, beating Oregon back in 2020. But I'm curious your thoughts on how important of a milestone this is. Like I said earlier, the team, probably doesn't necessarily care. The players, they're probably happy to see it, but they won't admit that it means a whole lot to them. But I'm curious to ask Jonathan Smith tomorrow, program building, recruiting, national spotlight, the fan engagement. How big do you think this is big picture for Oregon State to be in the top 25?
Yeah, I think it's all those things for all those reasons. It just kind of helps solidify what Jonathan Smith is saying to the recruits. It helps what he's saying to the team. We are building this the right way. You can see, it's a tangible piece of that rebuilding process that he can point to, whether that's to, Scott Bahns wanting to know, and to all of his constituents, whether that's boosters, whether that's recruits, players, to point to and say, hey, no, we are making incremental progress. Like you said, 2020, they beat Oregon. They had the USC losing streak that went down. Washington State losing streak went down. It would be nice to get one up in Seattle, because that's been a minute since they've won up there. But no, it'll be those steps, while they might not lead to a 5-star commit or a $1 million gift, it's all stuff pointing in the right direction.
Absolutely. Around the Pac-12 as well, in this week's rankings, you see Oregon at 8, USC at 9, UCLA at 10. I believe I'm getting those 2 LA schools correct there. And then another team at 11, and then you got Utah at 12. So the Pac-12 really dominates that. They're rounding out the top 10 and turning the corner into the top 20 with those 4 teams. Oregon State's the only other Pac-12 team ranked, but Washington has been kind of on the, they've been knocking on the door the last couple of weeks, have the Huskies. And man, if Oregon State goes up to Seattle on Saturday and pulls out a big win that probably not many people going into this week before seeing a number next to Oregon State's name would have said that Oregon State would have won. This is a game now where, assuming, and we'll have to talk about this too, assuming Oregon State is also ranked in the College Football Playoff Committee rankings, which will come out on Tuesday, they're probably the team in this matchup that has a number next to their name on the scorebug on the bottom of the screen. And, anytime an unranked team is playing against a ranked team, generally you think that the ranked team is the favorite there. So
but
it'll be interesting
right now. So I've seen Vegas has the Huskies anywhere from a 3 to 5 point favorite in this game. So
as they probably should be. These are 2 very evenly matched teams. They have the exact same record. Oregon State's going up to Seattle in a hostile place. We'll talk a little bit more about that right after we get out of this thing. But the College Football Playoff rankings will come out on Tuesday, and these are the first committee rankings of the season. I'm curious to see how it plays out, because Oregon State is only ranked in the AP poll. As you said, they just missed the coaches poll by 1 spot. There are some other teams that maybe lost last week that you could say, well, they might still have the resume to stay in. Maybe you look at a team like Washington and you say, oh, I like Washington's resume better than Oregon State's. That's what the committee does. They're more of a resume eye test kind of committee, whereas the AP voters are, all right, this is where I had teams last week. This is what happened. Now let me slot up and down. The committee is more of a power rating / eye test / resume / okay, what have you done recently type of thing. Does the bye week hurt Oregon State there? Does the fact that they're on a 3-game winning streak help? Does the fact that they just beat a team by 33 help? I'm really interested to see how this plays out on Tuesday.
I am too, because I don't know how they're going to view. Shellacking against Colorado isn't really that impressive. I wouldn't think, to a national. But the 3-game winning streak, the fact that they played USC, super close. I think, I mean, there's some things in Oregon State's favor, but then you look and, they barely eked by Fresno. They barely eked out a win at Stanford. They're all things that are going to be considered. Oregon State just doesn't have the name recognition or the kind of the pedigree that some of those schools have that I think does hurt them. But the more times that they can be mentioned in the rankings, and it just helps. Like you said, having that little number across the ticker, it all is just kind of even a subliminal thing that, okay, Oregon State.
And that name recognition thing will hurt them in the AP poll for sure. But you would like to think that when the committee puts out its top 25 on Tuesday, that name recognition, brand value, you would hope that none of that matters in the eyes of the committee, because these are the people who are determining who's playing for a national championship in this sport. You should want to see the best 25 teams in the rankings. You don't want to see Washington's had more success over the years than Oregon State, even though they have the same resume. Let's put them in and leave the Beavers out. You don't want to see that kind of stuff from a neutral college football fan perspective. I think that's where you see some of the differences in the polls. Obviously, it's different people voting in all of these things. The coaches poll, Oregon State finishing at 26, that's probably fair, but do East Coast teams who have coaches who are voting for this thing even watch Oregon State football? You don't know.
And
that's what I go back to with the committee. It's the committee's job to watch every game in college football.
And coaches poll, to me, I guess, you either go with AP, which are writers, or you go with coaches, which I've heard stories. The coaches don't vote. The coaches give it to their executive assistant and say, here, fill this out.
Yeah. I think if Oregon State does win this week, you see across the board that they're probably, they might be a top 20 team in some polls if they win this game in Washington on Friday. So let's preview that a little bit. We're going to go really short here on this pod, just a quick instant reaction to the rankings. So considering you've got two teams at 6-2, 3-2 in the Pac-12, one of them's probably going to be ranked, come Friday. We have to go off of the playoff committee rankings once they come out. I mean, we don't have to, but that's kind of the quote unquote like official ranking system once it comes out. One of them will probably be ranked. One of them is probably knocking on the door, if not right there at 25 in Washington. Is this probably the biggest game Oregon State's played this year? I mean, you look at the USC game and you say, man, they had a huge opportunity there, or going to Utah. Like, those are big games, but this feels like, this determines standings. This determines who gets the nod over the other when bowls come around. Like, this feels like it might be the biggest game on the schedule to date, at least in my opinion.
It totally is, Carter. And there's a great discussion right now in the Lodge where Prof has kind of laid that out. So really, when you look at the Pac-12 right now, you have those top four teams. You have, Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Utah. They're kind of up here. And then you have, I would say, Oregon State, Washington. They're right there. Like, are they going to jump up and be a contender, or are they going to, I think Prof named ASU as pretender. And then you have all the also rants that really have no shot, not even competitive. So this is a huge opportunity. Now, Oregon State missed a huge opportunity against USC, because if they had beat USC, they're right there. And there's a 5-way race there for potentially.
And they're probably a top 15 team.
And they're a top
15 25 team.
Exactly. And they've been in the rankings now for weeks. That was a missed opportunity. Utah on the road is what it is. This game right here, like you said, this could very well determine, whether Oregon State's going to Vegas for a bowl game, or they're going to
El Paso
or
San Diego.
Yeah. Somewhere, or what Brett McMurphy said, the First Responders Bowl or something. So
First Responders Bowl on the campus of SMU in Dallas.
Yeah. So like I said, maybe not that far, but this is huge. This is a huge opportunity. And I hope, I know the team is going to be ready for the challenge, and hopefully, coaches, everybody is dialed in for this one.
We're going to come back on Thursday and
Mhm.
preview that a little more in depth. We'll try to get an expert from Dogman, the 24/7 sports site for Washington, on the pod on Thursday. Of course, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming at BeaverBlitz throughout the week. Although it does change a little bit since the game's on a Friday, a couple of things will be moved up a day. But I'll also be there in Seattle to cover it. So we'll have full coverage of that game from start to finish, and all of the normal game week stuff. But it feels like a different week, Angie. It really does, with Oregon State being a ranked team, being in an important November game too. You know, the rankings are what they are. They're cool. It's always fun to see a number next to your team, but more importantly, it's Oregon State's 6-2 right now as they start the month of November. They've only got 2 losses. They're still playing for, they might not be in the Pac-12 title race, but they're not technically mathematically out of it just yet. They're playing for, they're jockeying for position in the bowl system. It has a different feel to it because we are so late in the season, and normally the fan base is checked out. Normally nobody's talking about Oregon State, but now Oregon State's one of the stories of college football because it just snapped one of the longest ranking droughts in the country. All eyes are going to be on this game Friday night on, national TV on ESPN2. Like, this is a position Oregon State has not been in for, probably a decade since it was ranked the last time.
Yeah. And I told you when we talked off air about this, there's this is the Beaver believer, I guess, in me that has been around this program so long that you just want so bad for them to actually embrace this opportunity and not let it slip through their fingers, because it kind of feels like this isn't a balance right now. And if they lose, things could go not south, but you're talking at the difference between a really, really special season and a good season.
Yeah. And since we're on the topic of rankings, if Oregon State goes up to Montlake and loses this game, the next 2 games might not even matter as far as getting back into the top 25. The Beavers would be a 3-loss team at that point. They would not have a ranked win. They would have lost to an unranked team potentially in Washington. And I don't know if the voters are going to say, all right, I'll, put my faith in the Beavers again. I'll trust them. I think it would take winning out at that point for the Beavers to get back into the top 25. So this does feel like a potential momentum building spot. It feels like you said, it's the rest of the season's kind of hanging in the balance. This is the kind of game where if you're saying Oregon State's ready to take that next step and become a top tier team in this conference, this is the kind of game that they have to win. Yeah. This is the kind of game that we went into the season saying, man, if the Beavers go up to Montlake, if they're having the kind of season we expect they might, once they get there, this has the kind of feeling of a huge, huge game for the program. And sure enough, that's coming to fruition. The Beavers could be 7-2 and probably a top 20 team after this week if they get the win. If not, we could be talking about the Beavers, maybe going to the Sun Bowl at best, probably looking at, knocking on the door of the rankings again, but, on the outside looking in, there's a lot.
And wins over, Cal and ASU isn't going to get them back in it. No. So this is like we've talked about, this is such a huge step. And we've seen it, we went from when Jonathan Smith took over just wanting to be competitive in any game to winning home games and being competitive on the road to now they're seeing that step of, they're taking care of business at home. They're winning the close games that they would have lost. That Stanford game or that Fresno game 2 years ago would have been losses. Being able to fight through that. And now they're actually being competitive on the road against top teams in the conference. So now it's a matter of taking that next step now and just going and winning on the road against a very similar opponent.
Not going to be easy to do. I do think Oregon State matches up well in the sense that the Beavers' biggest strength is its pass defense. It's one of the best pass defense teams in the country. Don't look at the yardage numbers. That would tell you a different story. But as far as on-ball defense goes, Oregon State's got one of the best secondaries in college football. And you're going up against one of the best passing attacks in college football with Michael Penix Jr. leading an elite passing offense. So, that probably determines the outcome of this game right there. It's the kind of game where if you're Oregon State, you want to see it really wet and cold and windy up in Seattle like it can very well be in November. we can have the debate on how much weather really plays a factor in passing games, but I think Oregon State's going to want to make it somewhat of an ugly game, force a couple of turnovers, some 3-and-outs. They're going to want this to be a defensive type of game, not let Washington take the top off the defense all that much. It does. It really just, it feels like a big game
but
for
is
the
it
Beavers
weird
in every sense.
But it feels weird to me that I don't have any real worries or concerns about the Oregon State defense. It's more about the offense. And I haven't been able to say that in probably a decade either.
It's very true. All right. We're going to touch on some men's basketball stuff here at the end, but I want to just give everyone a chance. If you're watching us live on YouTube, thank you for joining us on such short notice. I think I tweeted this thing out about 5 minutes before we went live. So shout out to everyone who's talking to us in the chat here. Throw some stuff in there if you want us to answer some questions, or if you've got some opinions you want us to share. We'll touch on that in just a minute. Let's talk a little bit of men's basketball, because the season is actually starting in like less than a week. This thing kind of creeped up on us. I know we're talking football, and that the headline of this episode has to do with football, but we didn't get a chance to talk about this since we're on bye week, and we didn't do a podcast earlier in the week. But Oregon State men's basketball head coach Wayne Tinkle took Dexter Akano, the guard, and forward Glenn Taylor Jr. with him down to Pac-12 studios in San Francisco for Pac-12 Media Day. And Angie, I know you saw the same clip that I saw. This is not when they were on the stage answering questions. This was a kind of a one-off thing with Andy Katz, and Andy tweeted this out. You want to tell the listeners what Wayne Tinkle claimed to Andy Katz? It has to do with defense.
Okay, I didn't watch it real quick, so help me out here.
He said
I watched it, but it was a couple days ago.
Right. Not top of mind. He said this could be Oregon State's best defensive team since he got here, which Wayne Tinkle's going into season number 9. Best defensive team is saying a lot, considering you think back to the Gary Payton II days.
I think that was a little fluff, because he also said this was going to be a rebuilding year too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm glad that he did embrace that. He said, it's going to be a rocky road.
Yeah,
there are going to be bumps along the way. But he also said, so many years at Oregon State, as long as Coach Tinkle has been here, Oregon State has kind of peaked at the end of the season. And obviously, no season exemplifies that more than the Elite 8 year. Really mediocre year. Fans are calling for Wayne Tinkle's job. And then right at the end of the season, they get hot. They win the Pac-12 tournament. They make a run to the Elite 8, and the rest is history in a not so good way for the Oregon State men's basketball program. But yeah, there have been Tinkle teams that have peaked at the end of the year, have built things up, and I think he kind of hinted towards this being one of those seasons where it might start out rough. We have 9 true freshmen or something crazy like that. All of these newcomers, only a couple of players from last year's team are back. I guess just, based off of what you might have heard or seen from Media Day, do you have any expectations for this team?
I don't. I mean, what I do expect, though, is that they play more cohesive as a team. And I think that's going to be the big thing. Last year just seemed so disjointed when you watch them play. They didn't play as a team. They seemed, like I said, just disjointed is the best way I can describe it. Just more individuals playing basketball and not a team sport. So I'm excited to see this group, from what I've seen online, and they've been putting out some little social media tweets and things of playing basketball out, pickup games and talking to, students around campus. And they look like they're having fun. And you can never underestimate how big that is when you're putting together a team. As long as the guys are having fun and are playing as a team, sometimes good things happen.
That was obviously missing last year in 2021.
They did not look like they were having fun last year.
No, just obviously an abysmal 3-win season, and the chemistry was off. And, you heard all the stories from, the end of the season, players bickering and nobody getting along, and the interactions on the practice court. And it's just, to Wayne Tinkle's credit, recognized that he needed to clean house, players and coaching
Yeah.
staff made the changes that were necessary and brought in a group of guys that I think everybody in Corvallis is really excited about as far as athleticism and potential, and frankly talent level as far as all of that is concerned. One last note from Pac-12 Men's Basketball Media Day is Wayne Tinkle explaining a little bit where things went wrong last year, and I think, Angie, we kind of read between the lines and assumed that this was the case. But after that Elite Eight season, Tinkle said, there were always going to be a couple of guys that left from that team, graduates, NBA kind of guys, Ethan Thompson. And Oregon State was relying on some of those next guys up to stick in the program, take a year of coaching, and step into roles as juniors and seniors. And Tinkle said this at Media Day. He said a lot of those guys, frankly, just left because they they didn't trust the process and they wanted to find playing time right away elsewhere. And because of the recruiting restrictions with limited on-campus visits and no in-home visits, Oregon State was not able to identify the kind of talent and character of replacements that it needed. And that ultimately is what led to just a catastrophic locker room type of season. Yeah. So it was, it was kind of great to hear Wayne Tinkle, I think, address that and
I appreciate
highlight where things went wrong a little bit.
I appreciate with Wayne Tinkle is that he always seems very honest.
Yeah.
He's not trying to, sugarcoat things. I mean, and I'm sure if you talk to him, he'd say the coaches probably, contributed to that as well and could have done better jobs in certain areas. So, I hope they have some success this year. It can't get much worse than it was last year.
That is very true. That is, as somebody who covered that entire season, man, I needed a vacation
from Elite
after
8.
That. Yeah.
You went from Elite 8 to that.
I covered one of the best seasons in Oregon State basketball history, at least the end of it, to less than 12 months later covering the worst season in Oregon State men's basketball history. And I had to recover with a week-long trip to Greece, like 2 weeks after that season was over. So
yes. And you didn't work. You just, you got
we
to
just,
eat good food.
we had to recover from that.
Yes.
Before we get out of here, let's go back to some football stuff. Obviously the news of the day is Oregon State cracking the AP top 25 for the first time in 8 years. Let's call it 9 years.
9 years.
Because it was a preseason of 2013. Let's take a few comments and questions from the YouTube chat, and then we'll get out of here. Jude says, it's a nice milestone, only be relevant until Tuesday if when the playoff committee top 25 comes out. Absolutely. There's a chance that 2 days from now, nobody will even know that Oregon State's in the top 25 because
nobody's talking about
you're going to see the networks go with the playoff rankings. That the AP poll kind of just disappears. It's basically what happened in the BCS era as well. Yeah. BCS rankings take precedent over the AP. Roger says, "What a season, or such a what if season of amazement. What if we beat USC and Utah? We're undefeated. What if we lost to Fresno State and Stanford?" I think that goes back to Angie's point about just these games, these close games going Oregon State's way and, being in tight games with good teams in USC. It does feel like there are some what ifs, but at the same time, we can play the what if game and still sit here on October 30th and say Oregon State's got a chance to have one of its best seasons in school history if it wins out.
No, it is. And like Roger said too, I mean, there's the what ifs of what if Oregon State didn't throw all those picks, Utah and USC, but there's also the what ifs of what if Oregon State didn't come back against Fresno. They're just right there. I don't think they're quite at that elite status yet, but we'll see. I mean, I think if they can somehow beat Washington on the road, beat Cal and ASU and that Civil War or Oregon game, because I do think Oregon is playing at a very high level right now. I mean, think about this. I mean, I'm not going to go out and just say Oregon State's a lock to win the Oregon game, but what if they play Oregon close, or it's a home game and the defense comes up big?
As it always does at Research, seemingly.
Bo Nix has been on a hot streak, but we've also seen Bo Nix not play so straight so well.
Throw
so
it to the other team.
exactly, he has a little penchant to Chance Nolan it every once in a while
Yeah.
and play catch with the other team. So anyway, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of what ifs out there, but it's fun that it's October 30th and we're talking about what ifs and we're not. Oh, it's basketball season because
Right.
nobody cares.
Normally,
it's a good
yeah.
spot to be.
Normally the what ifs that we're talking about in November are, well, what if the Beavers weren't 0-7 right now?
Yes,
Or what if the
yes.
Beavers hadn't beaten Portland State to, to remain out of the winless column? It's fun to have different conversations this time of year for sure.
Yes.
At Go Beavs from Twitter, does it worry you too with this new ranking going into Seattle? Not really for me. This is something we've talked about, and Jonathan Smith absolutely will talk about on Monday. The veteran presence, the leadership of this team, the whole player-led thing. Like a guy like Jaden Grant's not going to get caught up in the polls, and he's gonna make sure that he and Brandon Kipper and Tristan Jebby are all on the same page as far as like, all right, we got to preach to the guys that this means absolutely nothing. I don't think really they frankly even care that they're ranked.
Yeah. I saw Omar Spates retweeted it or some different, but no, you're right. I mean, this team a couple years ago, I would have been concerned about, but just this veteran leadership, and they know just how tight these games are. I mean, a guy like Jaden Grant has been there from the depths of abysmalness to now actually, right, knocking on the door to a lot of success. And so they're going to keep these guys, I think, in check.
Roger says if the Beavs win on Friday, then they may be one of the top ranked 2-loss teams in the AP poll. For sure. I think you look at Oregon State's resume at that point, if they have a win against Washington on their resume, especially on the road, Oregon State's only 2 losses at 7-2 would be to
two top 10 teams,
a 12th ranked Utah team and a 9th ranked USC team. I mean, those are, it's hard to have 2 better losses on your resume than that. Absolutely. Oregon State probably would and certainly should be.
Well, I mean, because look at
among
Utah.
the top ranked 2-loss teams in the AP.
I mean, Utah has 2 losses, but that's to USC and UCLA.
Right. And obviously, that's where the preseason rankings come into effect, and the voters vote on confirmation bias and whatnot. I'm not going to sit here and argue that Oregon State's a better team than Utah. Obviously, the Beavs got blown out in Salt Lake City, but resume alone would tell you that, they should probably be on somewhat similar level in the rankings. We do have a Seattle forecast in the chat as well. Friday night, temps in the 40s, 58% chance of showers, and 16 mile per hour wind. That's pretty much exactly what I'm expecting, actually. When I saw that, Angie, when you saw that this game was going to be played in November on the schedule, isn't that like the exact weather that you thought we would get?
Completely. Yeah. And a night game, Friday night game. Yeah. It's not even like a Saturday afternoon.
I'll say this. When I was up in Seattle back in the 2020 season, every press box in 2020 was open air due to the COVID restrictions. You had to have airflow. Those games were all played in November and December in the Pac-12. Pacific Northwest in December is obviously frigid and wet and windy, and that game at UW, I think, might have been the worst of it. I want to say it was like mid 30s. It was dumping rain, crazy windy, and they've got those garage doors in the press box, and they open them right up, and so you've got, I don't know, probably 30 yards worth of press box, just open air, huge windows wide open. Gonna be fun. I'm gonna bundle up on Friday. That is for sure. Anything else, Angie, before we get out of here? I think this was
did you have a good bye week?
We set out to do.
Did you have a good bye week?
Yeah, it was great. I worked for the first few days, got ahead of some stuff, and actually took Thursday, Friday, and Saturday off. So
nice.
A 3-day stretch. That's like the biggest vacation I've had since
you went to New York.
I was even still working then because we had Pac-12 football media day. Man, I want to say like maybe since spring.
Greece.
Yeah, maybe since like March or April. So that was nice. I needed to recharge, especially since we're going into such an important stretch run here over the next few.
And we can't mail it in now, Carter, because like the Beavs are like in it to win it now.
I think you have to say that Oregon State's in the national picture, right?
Yeah.
Like any team in the top 25 is going to be a nationally recognized team.
Yeah. I agree.
Cool
I'm glad that the bye weeks. I mean, I love bye week too. That's why I actually got up this morning and said I love Sunday bye week because it was nice to have my coffee and like watch a little sports ESPN in the morning. But I'm ready for games to start again. And I tweeted about this, so some of you guys probably saw it. But well, first of all, Friday night, my youngest son, who's a freshman at Sherwood High, happened to be at the Sherwood Bowman game and sent me a picture that Adley was there, and he got a picture next to Adley Rutschman. So that was cool just to see Adley. And he's so good with these kids that just look up to him like crazy. So there was that. And then on Saturday, one of my best friends from Oregon State days, her dad passed away. They live in Eugene. So I went down for the memorial service, and my senior son said he's totally into going to Arizona, Carter. I mean, we've looked at U of A, we've looked at Grand Canyon, ASU. He said, I better check out U of O. Do you even know how difficult that is to bite your tongue and like try to be like, just let them see? I'm like, we'll look. And I didn't say a word. We looked around and he said, okay, Eugene's kind of gross. I don't really want to go here. I'm like, thank you.
I think just about everybody listening to this will feel your pain on the quote. I want to check out U of O. And then just the sigh of relief. When...
Like there was that part of me, because I think he'll end up at Grand Canyon. The part of me was like, oh, it'd be nice to have him a little closer to home. But that other part of me like, oh, hell no. Yeah. Oh, hell's to
absolutely
the no.
not.
So yes, when we went and had lunch and he was like, yeah, I just don't think this is like where I want to be. And I was kind of like, okay, sigh of relief. Order whatever you want, buddy.
Yep. Lunch is on me. That's awesome stuff. We'll leave you guys on that note, I think. On this Sunday of a bye week.
Angie's son is not going to be a duck. Yes.
Not much to talk about other than Oregon State cracking the top 25 for the first time in 9 seasons. Great stuff. Awesome stuff to see Oregon State back in the national picture late in a college football season. Angie and I are going to be back on Thursday on the damn podcast. Probably. I mean, like I said, some things might get shifted around, but tentatively we're going to plan on Thursday to preview Oregon State at Washington. That game's on Friday. Until then, you can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns, and we'll talk to you on Thursday for another episode of the damn podcast.